Hi everyone, welcome back. Continuing on with my series of videos of science fiction movies into the 1980s right now. And now I'm up to the year 1984, which I have quite a few movies. I have 15 movies I'm going to cover from that year. And I know the year 1982 is often considered the one of the great years of science fiction movies if we're talking about American cinema, which I've talked about those movies. But the year 1984, though, there were many science fiction films released that year, and some of them are considered classics now. Probably The Terminator, directed by James Cameron, is the most well-known science fiction film of that year. But there were just a lot of interesting movies, science fiction movies, that came out that year. With, you had more studio films, you had independent films, just a real variety of movies that were exploring the genre that year. And I'm going to start out talking about Repo Man, which came out in March of 1984. And see the poster right there, sort of, with written and directed by Alex Cox, starring Emilio Estevez as Otto, a young punk who gets involved with a repossession business, as the title suggests, but also gets involved in a kind of a UFO plot as well, enters into the story. So Repo Man is considered a cult movie on many levels, mainly because is the soundtrack, which Alex Cox used all punk music for the soundtrack, and the style of the movie and the themes of the movie are also very much with the punk aesthetic in 1984 and by the mid-1980s. In particular, the hardcore punk scene on the West Coast, which did a lot to shape the themes of this movie as well. Yeah, and some of the themes in Repo Man are desolation, the part of Los Angeles the film takes part in often looks very run down, very dangerous. So there are shades of Escape from New York in there with that grungy aesthetic of the urban landscape. There's paranoia in the film. There's capitalism is a big theme in the film, specifically the Reagan era. Violence. There's the way violence is handled in the movie is notable. Anger is a theme. There's alienation. There's ideas of a lot of existential themes in the movie as far as how one should live in this capitalist system of where we're, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but there's a lot in the movie about how one should live in a world where it doesn't seem like there's much meaning at all, or at least not much to look forward to in this world. So it's a movie. We talk about 80s movies, and there's always a lot of nostalgia involved, including with a movie like Repo Man. But if you watch the movie itself, it's downbeat in some ways, but also it's trying to find a way out of all of the grim realities of the mid 1980s at this time. So it's an interesting movie working on different levels. I think I'm sure like this movie was a little before my time when it came out. I was too young when it came out, but I'm sure for a certain, if you were into punk music or post-punk music in the mid-1980s, this was a huge movie and continues to be a really important film from that part of the decade. Alex Cox, really interesting filmmaker. I'm a big fan of a movie he made a few years later called Walker, which is a historical film about America's involvement in Central America during the 19th century, and it's just a real fever dream of a movie. I believe Criterion has put that one out, and similar to Repo Man. There's a lot of connections between those movies, and I think even in Repo Man, at one point, someone's watching a television of reports on the Sandinistas in Nicaragua at the time. So there is some interesting connections between Walker and Repo Man. But to talk about Repo Man, so where Emilio Estevez in one of his early films for him, his first starring role, he plays Otto. He's a punk kid. He's working in a grocery store, gets into an argument with his boss, and storms off, tired of working that boring job that doesn't really have too much, doesn't really promise too much of a future for him. There's a brief scene of Otto moshing with the other punks as the music's playing, and he is hoping to go to school. And then there's a really brief scene with his parents, who are kind of these former hippies who are now religious fanatics who gave all of his college money away to some TV evangelist. That's a great satiric point about the 1980s. So he's really kind of stuck in financial place. His girlfriend has left him. Then he runs across Harry Dean Stanton, who just kind of gets him involved with repossessing cars. And Harry Dean Stanton becomes a sort of mentor to Otto, showing him the ways of the business as they go around, taking cars away from people who have not made their payments, and just giving him the ins and outs of how this works, and the irony of going from a punk as someone who opposes the system to now being someone who's kind of exploiting the system in some ways, and the whole place of people who repossess cars is something the movie's commenting on a lot. I think there's a line in the film how, Repo Man always has to be intense, how you're always getting into these violent confrontations with people. And there's also the idea too that the repossessing cars, like again, like there's kind of like the bottom, the dark side of capitalism, where their job is, they are thieves basically, but it's to maintain the system, so it's like they are enforcers of a system that all of them don't even necessarily believe in themselves. It's just a way for them to work. So the movie does a great job of tapping into that existential side of the odd place of the Repo Man and what they're doing. So the film is really good there. And so Otto becomes somewhat proficient at the job, and then he meets a girl along the way, Lila, who works for I think it's the fruitcake company or something, who are tracking UFOs. Okay, these people, and then there's this UFO part of the plot introduced in the story where there's a scientist driving around in a 1984 Malibu who has been lobotomized and maybe is carrying something of existential or extraterrestrial origin in his Malibu. So that, and you have government people in the government tracking him, almost shades of what Men in Black would be, because even the feds in this movie are kind of dressed in that Men in Black style as they are trying to track down this renegade scientist who has all these crazy stories about how he's involved in developing weapons and the neutron bombs and things like that. So that's the other plot, and in time these two plots start to intermingle with each other, and that's pretty much the story of Repo Man. There's some really good performances. Estevez is really good in his early role. Harry Dean Stanton, always great. Tracy Walter as Miller, who is a mechanic at the repossession garage, and he's really good. Like, he's kind of this philosophical type of guy who has all these kind of theories about conspiracies and UFOs and things like that. So he's almost kind of the conscience of the movie in some ways. But I just think, there's so much happening in the movie, and I think it's really fast paced the way the movie is set, and it just kind of, and the way it handles violence. Like there's one scene where we're also following this group of punks, former friends of Otto's, who are kind of going around just wreaking havoc throughout the city, and they're robbing convenience stores and things like that. And then there's this really violent shootout at this convenience store late in the film, and there's really no romanticism in a way the movie handles violence, and also commentary on consumerism, where all the products in the store simply have a label, just a very plain label on products in the store. So there's a lot of satire of Reagan era capitalism and ideas and things like that in the movie, which is strange. This was put out by Universal. It was put out by a major studio, and a lot of subversive things in this movie, including one of the earlier, well, not the first film, but a film that really had a vibrant soundtrack with Iggy Pop did the title theme song. The opening credits are really cool for the movie, and the Plugs are also in the film. Their music is really good, or the Plugs or Plugs. I should have checked that, but yeah, their music's great. The Circle Jerks, Black Flag, and some other well-known bands at the time contributed music to the film. So yeah. So those are some thoughts on Repo Man. I think a film that gets better with each viewings. I think where you catch on to the style of it, and it really looks and feels unlike any other film I think of that year. It's really unique, and the blending of punk with science fiction tropes, I think it really makes for a very memorable film. So those are my thoughts on Repo Man. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.